Fantastic. Well, here we are. Friends and family, cousins, uncles, brothers, aunties, sisters are in the building, and we're excited to have you. Hi, my name is Dr. Genna Styles-Lyas, and I am with Americans for the Arts. My role here is Director of Community Engagement and Equity for local arts agencies, but my role is housed inside of the research department, which I deeply love and appreciate. And I'm so excited to be joining you today for our role, our Americans for the Arts' only performance, only program for the Cultural Week of Action. Welcome to the Building the Bigger We, Arts and Culture and the Future of the American Democracy webinar. Woo, shout out. So we are excited to have you here. Let's talk a little bit about, before I introduce this fantastic panel, let's talk a little bit about what it is. As we are heading towards an election that our democracy is truly hanging in the balance. We came together with a fantastic partner, Race Forward, to create the inaugural Cultural Week of Action. It's happening now. It started on the 27th and it will be until October 5th, where we have gathered artists, arts and culture advocates, creatives, culture bearers, community members to come together to create work around this week that amplifies the need for a multiracial, just democracy as we continue to fight attacks on that very thing. So we are excited to be doing that here with the panelists that we have today. So here we are. We are day, what is this, 3 into our Cultural Week of Action. We had a beautiful launch on the 27th in St. Louis to launch the national event, where we both came together, Race Forward and Americans with the Arts came together in person to do a live event. This is the first event from a national perspective after, and then we have one more event that's coming tomorrow that's a national event where Race Forward and Americans for the Arts will partner again with an organization called Theater of War. But you know what? People are going to tell you more about that in a moment. So without any further ado, I'd love for our panelists to come into the space and say hello. Oh, wait, I forgot a visual description. Hi, I'm Genna. I am a Black woman with locks, longer locks, earrings with an afro, and degrees in the background with a green shirt on. I'm a millennial-ish, and I'm happy to be here. I'll throw it to Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela Glover Blackwell. My pronouns are she, her, Black woman, older, gray hair, in front of a bookcase with books and art in the background, wearing a purple shirt. Really happy to be here. I'm the founder in residence at PolicyLink, a national research and action institute advancing racial and economic equity. It's been around for 25 years. I stepped down as the CEO about 6 years ago, but I'm still connected to the organization. I'm also teaching a course at UC Berkeley on race, democracy, and public policy in the public policy school. Pat?
Okay, you can throw it to me. Thank you very much, Angela. I'm Pat Cruz. I'm a director emerita, recently retired, rewired from my work after 25 years at Harlem Stage. Prior to that, I was at the Studio Museum in Harlem. I have been blessed to work in the arts my entire life, and I remain committed to that. I am with white curly-ish hair, and I'm sitting in front of the work of my husband, the artist Emilio Cruz, a series of works called Homo Sapiens, so you can kind of get a sense of what my grounding is in the arts, and it's for all Homo sapiens. So I very much believe in that, and I'm happy to be here and looking at how the arts have transformed and are able to transform our society into a place that we want to be able to be a part of.
Love that. Bryan, can you come on in?
Thank you. My name is Bryan Doerries. I'm the artistic director of Theater of War Productions. In terms of image description, I'm a white, middle-aged man with a graying beard, and my daughter says I have 3 hairs on my head. I'm actually wearing a hat, but I think I have a few more than 3. I won't reveal them right now. But I'm delighted to be here with Angela and with Pat, with whom I've worked, both of whom are part of Harlem Stage, where Theater of War Productions has worked and collaborated, and really delighted to be part of this larger collaboration with Race Forward and Americans for the Arts. Theater of War Productions is a social impact company that uses theater and a variety of other media as a tool for engaging communities in powerful, healing, challenging dialogue, democratized dialogue about pressing issues of public health and social justice. And we're going to talk about some of those today, and one that you are all invited to tomorrow. But thanks again for having me be part of this.
Thank you. Thank you all. Woo! We in for it tonight. Well, today. I'm excited. So I just want to know what brings us all in the room today, right? So there's a connection here, even though it doesn't really seem like there's 3 different people here, but there's a connection, and it's the arts. But tell us a little bit of that history. Bryan, how did you get to be involved with Pat? And Pat, how did you get to be involved with Angela and all of the ties that bring us here together today?
Well, I'll just say briefly that I had the honor of collaborating with Pat, and by virtue of that with Angela, who is a board member of Harlem Stage, when we worked together on a project called Antigone and Ferguson, which briefly is a project that was born in St. Louis, Missouri. So going back to the sort of centerpiece of the week of action this week of St. Louis, in response to the murder of Michael Brown. And it's a project that we developed in St. Louis, collaborated with community members in St. Louis, and then brought to a number of other places around the country and the world, all the way to Greece and back, and then had the honor of running it off Broadway at Harlem Stage, at the Gatehouse, and then ultimately in Brooklyn at St. Anne's Church in Brooklyn. Pat and her team and her institution that she built were instrumental in taking that project to the next level. A project which in some ways is changed the way that Theater of War Productions collaborates, and our notions of what community collaboration actually means.
And for us, if you'd like me to pick up on that, I have to say that when Bryan brought this idea to those of us at Harlem Stage, James King, who was the managing director, then played a seminal role in this activity. It was such a natural, because we had all been reeling from the murder of Michael Brown, and what you feel is, how do you respond to this? How do you react to it? How do you use art to inform and transform people's thinking? How can audiences be brought into an event and a series of events that really interrogates a circumstance and attempts to understand it, and looks at the role of the individual as their own agent, bringing agencies to the individual to say, I can participate in changing this. And what was wonderful about the event and Bryan's conceit for Antigone was that it was participatory. It wasn't just a teaching to or a preaching to moment, but also because this was what Harlem Stage has done from the beginning. This has been our mission, to really look at how the arts and culture can transform us and bring about a state of both racial and social justice. So it was a no-brainer and a thrill to do, and it was within the context of our mission.
I love that. And in the spirit of participatory engagement, feel free, as we're having this dialogue. It's a dialogue that you all can jump into as well through the question and answer box. Thank you, April. Put it in the chat. Please do. If there's a question that comes up, we will try to answer it in real time. If we can't answer it, then we will definitely hold space for a response as we follow up after this event. I want to bring Angela in to talk about the current state, but I would be wholly remiss if I did not mention the disaster that is happening throughout 55 countries or counties in our country.
Yeah.
Florida, North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, places that are just being decimated due to the disaster of a hurricane. And so I just want to send some, hold some space for those people, for those counties, and share a deep sense of support as much as we can there. So I wanted to name that in this space today. I also want to bring Angela in to talk about how history shapes our present and what is the role that creatives can play in bringing narratives that are overlooked to the forefront.
Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging the suffering that's going on right now. We have a whole new thing that we're going to have to worry about in this country as we worry about so much that's related to climate change. And that's climate migrants. That people who have been determined to stick it out because of the places where they love are now starting to wonder if they can. And it's happening in many different places. The first time I came in touch with it, it was in Louisiana, where there's a whole effort going on now to help people relocate out of the way of danger. This notion of migration is really important, migration and immigration and the movement of people. And when you ask the question about history, history is always tied to movement, that things are developed and people move to new spaces. They move away from community, they move to community. We are constantly seeing what happens. And the history of this country is a history of movement.
Yeah.
Part of what people are often talking about when they refer to the United States is that it's a nation of immigrants. And that is such a false narrative. It hides so much. To say that just glosses over so much. When you talk about a nation of immigrants, the first thing that one is doing with that narrative is ignoring indigenous people. That the first thing you're doing is ignoring indigenous people. This is not a nation of immigrants. It is a nation that includes the people who were here in the beginning. To talk about immigrants is to suggest an agency, a willfulness in terms of relocating yourself. It ignores the history of people who are Black in the United States of America. Did not come by choice. We're stolen, we're brought here not to be able to pursue a better life, but to be able to help people who were greedy and small-minded and mean to be able to pursue their better life. And so this whole notion of narratives and history is just so important to tell the truth. To tell the truth. Because if we don't tell the truth, if we don't peel back the onion, if we don't find the real origins, we will end up in the place that we are in right now, which is a nation that was able to gallop along for decade after decade on myths, stereotypes, and misinformation until now it has run right up against the wall of it's not going to work anymore. And so democracy is in peril because the nation doesn't know its history. And as history is now hitting the nation in the face, becoming a nation in which the majority of people are not white, the majority of people will be of color by 2042, 2043, but already the majority of babies born in this country, the majority of young people under 18, majority of the young workforce, we're there already. And the nation doesn't know what to do about it. It doesn't know how to align it with the stories it's been telling itself. And so we're at a point where creation is going to be our savior. Invention is going to be our savior. And this is where arts and activism and dreams all come together.
That's beautiful. There's a lot of data that support the idea of bringing folks together across. I mean, first of all, let's talk about some of the arts movements. To your point, Angela, you think about James Brown, you think of Harry Belafonte, you think about any major movement that happened in America has the seat of it has generally been some sort of arts and culture. So I appreciate you lifting that up. And I also appreciate the idea of understanding that this arts and culture space is where we have seen experiences that connect people together, that bring people, align people in at least sharing an idea of what the world is. 72% of Americans believe, from a public opinion poll that was put on by Americans for the Arts, that arts and culture brings people together, in across age, gender, beliefs, race. 63% of Americans believe that arts and culture help people better understand community. So there's lots of data that support this. Pat, I would love to bring you in to talk about sort of how that arts and culture really kind of bring on some of that innovation, some of that racial justice, some of those other kind of things that Angela was talking about.
Yeah, it's interesting because participating in this conversation has made me have to go back and think a little bit more beyond the contemporary art that I have presented for the last 50 years. And I thought particularly about James Weldon Johnson and Lift Every Voice and Sing. James Weldon Johnson was all of the things that we have been talking about. And in 1900, he wrote the poem. So he was a poet and a novelist and a principal. So he was an educator as well, but he was also an activist with the NAACP. So his role was one of artist, activist, and that poem that became a hymn, that became the national Black anthem, has been a part from the beginning of artists and arts activists playing a role to change and influence our thinking, igniting our imagination, moving, inspiring us to go on the civil rights marches that we did. Those marches would not have been those marches without the songs that inspired and supported people in their effort for racial and social justice. So we've seen that. We see it through James Baldwin. We see it through Alicia Keys and Freedom. Now with the election that's coming up and the use of that, I think that, as well as the visual arts, the poetry, and all of those things have served us to ignite the imagination, because we talk a lot in the creative space about the nature of imagination, who we can become, who we are now, what is the portrait of the now, and how we are in that, a part of that portrait, and who we can become. And I think most relevantly, who we can become together. If we disown the myths that Angela has talked about, the false narratives, how do we move forward with narratives that in fact reflect what our aspirations are?
I love that so much. I want to bring Bryan in because, Bryan, I feel like your work is like also at the seat of some of this too, where you get to grapple with some of the questions we ask all of the time, or at least not we, I'll say me, when it comes to how we do this, how we do America differently, and more broadly for everybody. So sort of what are some of the narratives you are trying to push forward in the work that you do? How do you protect those, and talk to us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so one of the questions at the center of Theater of War Productions work is, whose stories are these? Who gets to be speaking? Who's gets to interpret the stories? And it's sometimes is a little bit of a red herring when we say Antigone and Ferguson, or you see some of the classical texts we perform, but even those texts don't necessarily belong to Europe. Those texts don't necessarily belong to the institutions that have claimed ownership over them over thousands of years. So that's one thing. The other is, we talk often in the arts and in the space of activism about access, and everyone should have access to culture and to the arts. There's no question about that. They should have it in their schools. They should have it in their communities, in their places of worship and work. They should have it in their homes. But one of the questions I struggle with and think about a lot is access to what? Because some of the forms that have taken hold during the late 19th, early 20th century that still are very much in place in our cultural world may in fact be structures of oppression left over from an earlier time and how they're conceived. What does it mean to walk into a cultural space past a security apparatus where there's someone with a a badge or even a weapon? What does it mean for everything to be transactional, where you're paying money and there's something being bought and sold? What does it mean to be relegated to silence in a space, or told in a museum that you have to behave a certain way? These are all part and parcel of these structures. And thinking about, what Angela's work, and thinking about how she started by talking about like what will actually be required for this democracy to live, to thrive, to grow, to recognize the true pluralism, inclusive of the indigenous community, the communities that were here before settlers came, and others were brought against their will. What would it actually mean to build new forms that are capacious enough to hold the complexity of this democracy? Mm. And so at the center of Theater of War Productions work, at the center of this project, Antigone and Ferguson, and the project that we're going to be presenting tomorrow night in St. Louis, that everyone will be invited to at the end of this webinar, is the question of, what does it mean to build a chorus that can't preach to itself? Mm-hmm. Because we all know that we're not necessarily going to agree or subjectively see things the same way. What does it mean to hold space with people you disagree with vehemently? Can we hold space with people we disagree with vehemently and still respect their humanity and engage with them in a direct way? And what role can the arts play? Well, I think the arts are an act of mediation. It creates spaces that don't require violence. They don't require ad hominem attacks or any kind of damaging strategies. They actually create spaces where people can hear each other in different ways. So with Antigone Ferguson, we set out to build a chorus that couldn't preach to itself, built based on the Greek chorus in the play Antigone, a chorus that included friends of Michael Brown, members of the faith community, Michael Brown's teachers, Black Lives Matter activists, as well as police officers from St. Louis, as well as concerned citizens. We knew they would never all agree, but they agreed to come together and sing music together that was composed by a local St. Louis composer, a brilliant man named Dr. Philip Woodmore. And they made the agreement, which we make with our audiences, to hear each other's interpretations of the story. So whose story is it and who gets to interpret it? And I know in our work, it's working when actually the arts and culture are a strategy of mediation that brings us together in ways that wouldn't have been possible, where we can hear each other, and where we reach a level of complexity in the discourse, where things become so complicated they can't be divided into neat binary oppositions. And I see I think, like Angela, an abundance of work to be done, an infinite amount of work to be done, creating new forms and new structures that are capacious enough to hold the complexity of this burgeoning new pluralistic democracy that is here. Mm-hmm. And I think it's the role that we as artists get to play.
Can I jump in on that a little bit, Bryan? Because I do believe that to build that space that is capacious, as you say, I love that word, and embrace the ability to listen to one another, I believe that begins in a solid education program, whether that is education in the home or in the public schools. And I think the fact that we have lost that for at least the last 25 years, if not 50 years. When I was coming through public schools, culture and education and arts education was a critical part of what we learned. And our ability to either have desires or imagine ourselves in those spaces was stimulated and brought into being by that kind of education. And this is, I'm talking about a poor segregated schools in Chicago. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. This was not any kind of elite education. It was what public education was 60 years ago, 70 years ago. We've lost that. And I think that a critical part of our advocacy, our activism has got to be to restore that. First of all, I guess we got to hold on to public education at all, right? And then to make sure that as we hold on to it, the arts and culture are part of that. Because I think that is the framework through which we can come to see ourselves either as artists or people who love art or who are engaged in the understanding of cultural difference, and to allow that difference to be something that informs and makes us all bigger and better.
I love that so much. I think too, 95%, 92% of Americans would agree with you that arts in education is a priority. It's something that we should do, that is good. And only 52% of people believe that that is even attainable, that that's something that we are even close to. So that is the kind of things that we are facing currently in this system that we have.
Yeah.
But we can do so many things. Creativity and innovation is a top 5 skill according to like Forbes and the people who make lots and lots of money. So like, how do we make these things actionable, these things that we imagine into action? So I want to start with Bryan one more time, and then Angela, if you want to step in too, pick whoever wants to start. But how do you see arts feeding a culture that is and practice around social justice and racial justice in the work
I
that you
want
do?
to say something before Bryan jumps in about what you, coming off of what you were just saying, that 90-some% of the people in this country believe what Pat said ought to be happening. Over 75% of people in this country believe that a woman ought to have control over what happens to her body. The fact that we don't have arts in public schools, the fact that Roe versus Wade has been overturned, that represents a crisis in democracy.
Yeah.
Because what both indicate is that the people have no voice in the governing of their country. And so one of the things that I've been really focused on is to be able to lift up the notion, what is democracy, and democracy for what? And what I'm thinking is that what we need is a radically inclusive, thriving multiracial democracy in service of human flourishing that can lead to a good life. And I'll bet you that most people in this country want to have that, but they are so out of touch with their power that they are allowing the country to drift in directions that they could stop instantly. And so part of what I think we need to happen is we are discussing is to figure out a way for people to be in touch with each other so they know that thing that is nagging you is nagging everybody. And we need to find each other, and we need to turn that nag into action and participation and reclaiming our democracy. I teach a class on some of this, and just yesterday, the class was really attempting to help people to see how race is really permeating through everything, particularly in our immigration system, and how people who are Asian and Latinx have suffered from the same racism that people who are Black suffer from, because it's those protocols of oppression that come out of the Black-white paradigm that determine all of that. And we were having a discussion about, because of the way immigrants have been treated in this hierarchy of human value, there are many people who are Black and Asian who are citizens in the United States of America who are alien citizens, because even though they may have citizenship, it's not full. And we were talking about how the fact that so many people had been deported to Mexico who were in fact citizens during a time when this country was pushing out immigrants from Mexico when they brought in when they needed labor, and then deported when they didn't need their labor anymore. After class, a student from Kenya came up to me to say that that discussion had shed light for him on the fact that there are Kenyans who are alien citizens, in that because of their deep poverty and their separation from infrastructure, they feel no connection to the governing of the country that they live in. I was so struck by that. And I do think this is exactly where art comes in. That if we can find ways through art and culture to be able to create these connections, these moments, that is what will allow us to be able to tap into the broadly shared desire for change, because we have a broadly shared existence. And when we understand that existence, we can then see our pathway. So I just wanted to make that circle. Democracy is in crisis because we don't know that others are feeling exactly what we're feeling, and we don't know what to do about it.
Thanks, Angela. That's actually perfectly aligns with what I wanted to say. So I'm really glad you went first. My background is originally in classics, Greek and Latin, and I was a lover of classical civilization, and that was my way into theater. Over the last 18 years of running theater of war productions, I've gone from calling myself an evangelist for ancient myths to being an evangelist for the amphitheater. I'm no longer a sort of bullish about, or really particularly concerned with the myths of Western civilization, but I am deeply, deeply committed to the technology of the amphitheater, which in ancient Greek means the place where we see in both directions, where I see you and you see me, and we see ourselves reflected in the stories that are told, and we see ourselves responding to the stories, and we step back from the roles that we're all playing and acknowledge that we're all having a common experience. To me, this technology is as refined a technology as anything developed by any civilization. And it, like an external hard drive, when you plug it into the right group of human beings, it knows what to do. And cross-culturally, we've tried this out in lots of places. I think it's a not only uncoincidental that the amphitheater in ancient Greece was born concurrent with the experiment of democracy. We can say lots of negative things about the experiment in 5th century Athens, but concurrent with that experiment was a theater that was inextricably civic, religious, part of the military and its exercises. It was foreign nationals were present. They emptied the jails. Everyone in the state was sponsored to come, and 1/3 of the democracy, the Athenian citizen population, would sit and watch these plays about experiences of loss and of trauma and of hardship and of pestilence. And my experience over the last 18 years has been watching audiences engage with these texts like Antigone, which we did in Ferguson and then in Harlem Stage, and it becoming this act of not just I see you and you see me, and I see that we're actually affected by some of the same systems and the same losses and challenges, but the communalization of trauma itself out of necessity, a tool for the communalization of trauma. And that's what I mean by new forms. That a democracy needs artistic forms that are as important to the democracy as itself as the political structures that uphold it. And that the arts play a role that in ancient Athens, the arts were a pillar of that democracy. And the amphitheater was the place where people went to communalize their experiences and to engage with each other and to see where we all connected and to experience, because the god Dionysus in ancient Athens was the god of boundary dissolution, of ecstasy, the breaking down of the boundaries that exist between us. And that to me is a tool that we need in a democracy. That's a tool that we need. And that's a tool we need for racial justice as well. Yeah. And so when I talk about my work and we talk about theater of war productions, people sometimes get hung up on the Greek part. And I think this is a technology that almost every civilization or community ultimately builds if you give them enough time. And I can certainly think of ways that ancient African traditions echo and reverberate with this type of tradition, its relationship to myth, its relationship to the communalization of lived experience.
Bryan, let me jump in on that because I'm so pleased that you've chosen the amphitheater as a kind of paradigm in which you're working, because as you were saying it, and I didn't think this before, but it also implies a connection to amplify. Mm-hmm. So that you are amplifying sound, you are amplifying ideas in a way that is magnificent. When I was looking at the kinds of things, in addition to James Weldon Johnson, and I was thinking of Marvin Gaye, What's Going On in 1971, you know, all of the things that have led us to question and interrogate the Mexican muralist movement that has been going on in California, and that was then also utilized by African American artists around the country. I do think that there has been a critical role that the arts have played in looking at and advancing the ideas of racial justice and social justice that can lead to that flourishing, that democracy that is a flourishing democracy that Angela speaks about. So I'm happy to look at Amplify in a new way, Bryan. Thanks for that.
I appreciate, I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to one of these ancient amphitheaters. In Greek, the word theatron is the theater, is the seeing place,
Yeah.
but really it's the hearing place.
Yeah.
If you've ever been to one of these spaces, you know they were designed architecturally in such a way you can hear with the clarity of noise canceling headphones a person on the other side of the space. So what does it mean to build technologies where we can see and hear each other with that kind of clarity?
Yeah.
And what's the role of the artist of then playing within those forms and technologies and bringing people together in a democracy where many things divide us? So these are, it's only one metaphor, but I'll take it one step further, which is thanks to my colleague Marjolaine Goldsmith at Theater of War Productions. At the beginning of the pandemic, we moved to Zoom, and I know we're on Zoom now, and people have what they call Zoom fatigue, and they have pandemic fatigue, but I will never get tired of doing sacred things on Zoom.
Mm-hmm.
I've done a lot of banal things on Zoom. I'm sure we all have. Like I've done a lot of boring and sort of soul deadening things on Zoom. But an exchange like this, an exchange of people across borders and boundaries, an exchange where we can talk to people in autocracies or in their closets or in their cars or in their bedrooms, where you don't need a ticket and you don't have to pass a security apparatus to participate. You could be bedridden, you could be disabled. Like this, we've entered the 21st century and we are playing within a new amphitheater. And we have technologies at our disposal that can bring us together if we get past the ways that they've been corporatized or designed by corporations to sort of legislate communication. I am so bullish, so excited, based on our experiences of having 15,000 people from 42 countries come to our first event on Zoom, or 87 countries come to another event with the Nobel Foundation that we did on the climate, of what's now possible. When I say new forms, I mean it's the merger of the ancient with the emerging technologies of the present, through which we'll begin to solve some of these questions about how do we create forms that will meet the needs of a pluralistic democracy.
I love that. I'm gonna give another A word. We got access, I think was the first one. We got amplify, amphitheater, amplification. Let's move into the space of abundance. I think that there's lots of things that we talked about here that feel tight, that feel a little tight, that feel a little bit like, is there ever enough? I mean, America is uniquely positioned with a lack of investment in the arts. I think Bryan gave me this stat. An opera house in Paris has the same budget that the NEA has for us. More than, thank you.
Yeah.
More than
one
opera house in Paris, the entire NEA budget, right? So these are things that we want to lean into a spirit of abundance. But Angela, can you help us talk about how we get there? What's the path forward into abundance? Hopefully, fingers crossed.
The first path is to imagine it. We spend a lot of time fighting among ourselves, those of us who are advocates for social change, and those of us who are working within health and education and transportation. There's always this battle to get more resources for what it is you're trying to do, because it is a mindset of scarcity. And what I always say is that we are not a poor country and we need to stop acting like one, that there is abundance. Clearly, when people have enough money that they can use billions of dollars to go into space for 11 seconds, there is enough money to do anything that we want to do. And so I have a couple of podcasts. One of them is called Radical Imagination. And in the Radical Imagination podcast, what I encourage people to do is to really, by giving them examples, that any problem that exists, there is a way to be able to deal with it. And there are people who are already working on that change. We have to release our radical imaginations. And one of them is to know that there is plenty. We are in a time of abundance. We are not tying it to our human needs. We are not governing for human flourishing. We're not expecting that we can actually build the kind of societies in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. And so we need to stop starting our quest for improvement by assuming a low ceiling and just assume that we can have everything that we need to get where we want to go and begin to build those dreams. What I often say is there is a through line from resistance to creation, from rebellion to invention. And what that means is that when we begin to say, we are going to stand up for what is right, and you are finding others who need that, you can use your own creativity to put in place things that have not been before. It's particularly important right now as the nation is in peril and the world is in peril. And we are able, if we take this moment, to be able to demonstrate a new way. And in this new way, there will be the ability to be able to tap into the abundance, to be able to see ourselves as united, and to be able to see that the gift that we have is our difference. That in our differences are the solutions and the pieces that can knit together like a puzzle to create all that it is we want. As I'm thinking about this, I think it is so important that we do something that a friend of mine talked about when we often say, I see you, I see you. He says, what we need to say is, I see us. I see us. And that us is what within it has the strength and the capacity for all that we need. Daniel Allen, W.B. Du Bois, James Baldwin, all talk about the fact that people who have been denied freedom the most are the ones who embrace it and understand it the best. And so as we try to build this new way, we have to have those who have been denied freedom in our leadership, helping through their creation in murals, their creation in dance, their creation in struggle, to be able to help us see more sharply what could be. Because people who have had it can't see the sharpness of it. People who have not had it understand it in a very deep way. And we have too many people who have that sharp vision who are not in leadership positions to be able to pursue their visions.
Angela, I have a question on that. I mean, I love your theories, your work, your advocacy. And my question becomes, how do we access the abundance in a society that has prioritized the military and looking at the kinds of budgets that are constructed that provide that leave us the leftovers, a scarcity, as Bryan has talked about in terms of what the budgets are, that are budgets for education, for culture institutions, for cultural activity. How do we carve out of this abundance and access this? Because my concern is, and it's not an optimistic one, I know this, but when I think of people who are homeless and without health care and without an education, my concern is, how can they imagine something other than this? How do we together drive the prioritization of the allocation of this abundance so that it addresses the inequities that we are currently faced and have faced from the beginning?
There's no way for it to happen without struggle. And we have to really be engaged in struggle. Because if we struggle and we allow that struggle to get into every aspect of our lives, we will have a new set of leaders, a new set of agendas for change, and a new sense of the possible. Everything that you have just described is there because we have allowed it as the people in this nation to have people who are representing us in Congress, in the Senate, in the White House, in the governor's house, in the city council, on the school board. We're allowing people through a so-called democratic process to make decisions that only favor the very wealthy. If we take back the control that is there for us to take control of, we can see if democracy can work. Can we have a democracy of the people, by the people, and for the people within a society of profound difference? There's no example of it. There is no example on earth of democracy working within the context of profound difference. This is a world nation that we have created in the United States of America. And there is a moment to see if the people decide that they are going to exercise their constitutional rights, their democratic rights to be able to decide how the nation will be governed. It's supposed to be governed of the people, by the people, and for the people, governing for human flourishing, governing for racial equity, governing for a prosperous future with the resources that we have, which are clearly abundant. The notion of abundance is not one that we have to create. We can see the abundance all around us. We have to capture that abundance and put it in service of a vision of human flourishing that includes all. This is our moment to test it. It's our moment.
Can I just say, I really appreciate that vision so much. And I picked up on the word abundance because we talked before, and I couldn't stop thinking about it since we first spoke. When I think on a more granular level about what artists can do and what people who are creative can do, I also think there's an infinite amount of work to be done outside of institutions. And so I think about, I had the honor of with my company being public artists in residence for New York City for 2 years. And over those 2 years, we went all over the 5 boroughs and into the most underserved communities. And we weren't spreading the gospel of the arts, although other people do that well, and I'm grateful to them. The thing at the center of what I'd like to think is a democratized, pluralistic form that Theater of War Productions is trying to uphold is a reverence for gift exchange with audiences. That's something that can't be transactional, something other cultures know deeply, that the minute it's transactional, the minute it's institutional, it's something else. A reverence for the wisdom in every audience. And we've done a lot of performances in homeless shelters. We've done a lot of performances in prisons and jails. We've done a lot of events in Title I schools and in NYCHA developments and public housing. And we've done a lot of work in places where people have never heard of the plays or the texts or even the form that we're showing them. And yet our belief as practitioners is that the audience has more to teach us than we to teach them. And I think sometimes we as artists or people who identify as artists can be very self-congratulatory about the role that we play, as if we're bestowing the gift of culture upon communities that don't have access to it, for instance. And what if the order is totally the opposite? What if the gift is bestowed by the audience that hasn't been acculturated to these oppressive forms that I was referencing earlier? What if the gift is from the person who's experiencing homelessness, who hopefully by virtue of being engaged in the process gets a meal, gets cared for in a certain way that's not simply about this exchange, that there's a gift exchange happening, but the gift of knowing the fragility of human life, of the fleeting possibility of achieving change or happiness within a lifetime, that consciousness that's brought to bear by people who face struggle and adversity, that's a gift. And what new things are possible when we approach communities with reverence for what they know that we can't possibly understand, even as artists who thought deeply about the questions that we're asking? I do think that plays into this larger question of abundance, because I think there's infinite work to be done outside the structures that we normally think of as channels of culture, by reordering our relationship with the communities we're engaging and how we're engaging them.
Now, you know, you done said some words here, y'all, about to put me in some other places, okay? Woo! Okay, so I know I have had some copious notes. I feel like I'm back to school, man. I feel like I'm in here learning some things. I hope y'all are taking notes as well. So grateful for the time. I know that we have a couple of questions, if that's all right with you, all here in the room. We have a couple of questions that maybe perhaps we don't need to answer them all in the space, or pick and choose, but I'll name one is a comment, the word catharsis. One can gain a new mindset, a lasting change that pivots from pain, a better direction wrought from creative art. Whoa, that's a bar right there. Okay, thank you. That was great. So here's a good question here. How can we harness our democratic power to better influence spending for arts and culture in America? Other countries place great value, including financial support for their artistic communities.
Well, I think I spoke to that when I said we just have to begin to claim, participate, start where you are. That PolicyLink, when it started 25 years ago, our focus was to influence policy from the wisdom, voice, and experience of people working for change in their local communities. Our belief is local leaders are national leaders. They are addressing and solving national problems because they are part of the nation and what they're doing. Just as Bryan was saying, the kernels of how to be able to move forward are right there on the ground. And the question really just brings that back to mind. People in their local communities can have tremendous impact, and people know that. We get so turned off when it seems that we can't impact what's happening in Washington, that we can't impact what's happening in the Defense Department and other places, but we can impact what's happening in our local communities. Get involved, make your voice heard, join with others, start elevating the arts, start elevating culture, make sure it's happening right there in your school. That is how we make a difference, by starting where we are, demanding what we want, and then rolling up our sleeves and saying, what am I going to do to be part of the solution? There's no other way. There is no other way. We have to make it happen. You can't just write a letter and tell Senator so-and-so to make it happen. Do that, but
Right.
you make it happen.
At one point, there had been, Angela, I appreciate this kind of emphasis on what we can do. Many years ago, I remember us talking about surveying and actually asking each person who was running for a particular office, whether it was the school board or your community board or your state or city government, as well as your federal government leader candidates, a series of questions that says, what are your commitments to? And then going through and making there being a test that they would have to pass in order to secure your vote.
Mhm.
So I know that that was a long time ago, and I don't think anybody's really done it adequately. But I do think it's the one mechanism or one of the mechanisms to which we can hold our elected officials or the school board, because all of these are elected positions, accountable to say that these are the things that we want, and to look at trying to bring people into the governance structure that accommodates these desires and demands.
And while I think it's important to do that, absolutely, it's also important to just create what you want on your own.
Yeah.
I have seen the power of just create what you want. That the colleagues and I, 25 years ago, were introducing the idea of racial equity, just and fair inclusion into a society in which all can participate, prosper, and reach their full potential. And being able to ask, what do we want everyone to have? And how do we back in to what the inputs need to be for different groups and people to get there? It was a foreign notion. People didn't know what it was. They didn't know what equity was, didn't think you could talk about race. And over time, the notion began to get concreteness. It began to spread. It began to get used. It became part of the lexicon of what social justice is really about. From 25 years till the time that when President Biden got elected, he signed his first executive order was to do a racial equity audit of every agency in the federal government. And it happened. And people had to then look, and after they'd done the audit, mostly what they found was a lot of racial inequity, to begin to look at how they were going to align their budgets with racial equity. I put that out there because that is outside of government coming up with an idea, building that idea, building a demand for it, building definition for it, and landing it right in the White House and having the President of the United States asking government agencies to do something about it. If we could do that, we could take that same approach with anything. Begin to show what it means to totally incorporate art and culture into your local community, how to actually have respect for it, to have reverence for it, to be connected to it, to see how iterative it is, to be able what you want, to vision it and then refine it, and then just keep taking it forward. We can recreate the nation that we want to live in. We can create the world that we want to live in, but it takes action, activism, togetherness, and a strong sense of what is possible.
I really do. I think it's a grassroots effort, and that we shouldn't be waiting for any politician or institution to start it or make it happen at the community level. One other organization I'm involved with and have been for almost 20 years is the Scholastic Art and Writing Awards, and they've been around for over 100 years. And at the center of this program, which has recognized the early promise of Romare Bearden and Sylvia Plath and Andy Warhol and all kinds of people when they were just kids, is this belief that by showering young artists and writers with the kind of praise, adulation, and approval that young athletes receive reflexively, automatically in communities across the country, no matter where you live, we actually reinforce that this is a role as valuable as any other role. And we're a country of massive contradictions. We've been talking about that throughout our conversation today. One of them is, I think, we claim to be about innovation. We claim to be about being on the bleeding edge of technology and coming up with the next paradigm shifting idea. And yet we do not only put our dollars there, we don't put our love, our approval, our adulation, our celebration into the emergent creativity of young people. We will readily tailgate party a football game. The whole community will come together. And I say we because football is something that brings a lot of Americans together, the sublimation of violence into a sport. And again, with concussive injury, with all due respect to those who love football, I think we can come up with better forms for bringing people together that actually will have a lasting impact on our communities, on our democracy, on our nation, on the world. So why aren't we tailgating for young creative kids? Why aren't we celebrating them like the stem cells that they are, about to manifest into myriad possibilities of ingenuity and imagination? We have to invest there. And I think every community can do that, with or without the government, with or without a public school system that's fully funded. That's about values. And I think I've been watching it happen in the communities the Scholastic Awards have been engaged with, some of which have been for over 100 years, throwing these parties for young people when they receive adulation for their creative output. I just know we can transform this country if we take on as a value and live it, the value of truly believing and cultivating creativity, ingenuity in the younger generations.
Yes, let's celebrate that. Celebrate that. Time has been our friend, but is mean because we are coming to the end of it together, which it's bittersweet. And so I think what made this conversation so successful is that we didn't give y'all the sure straight way to go forward and change democracy as we know it. We didn't give you the cheat codes there. The success of this conversation was grappling with some of the challenges that we do have, being creative and innovative of how we move within those kinds of spaces, and to build a future where we can have broader conversations that are supported and celebrated throughout the community and throughout the country. So I just wanted to give a big old thank you to everybody who's on the screen and everybody who is still watching us here. Thank you for your time. If you want to engage in the project, really quick, some plugs. If you want to be a part of Culture Week of Action, you still have 4 days to do it. Do the hashtag or pound sign, depending on your generation, hashtag CWA24. You can also do hashtag pound sign building the bigger we, or the bigger we actually is just the hashtag. So hashtag these things, post them up, tag Americans for the Arts, tag Race Forward, so we know that they're happening, so we can amplify your work. Amplify, yes. Next, make sure I think it's plugged in the chat a bunch of times, but Bryan's work tomorrow, we're going to be in the Zoom room together tomorrow night, looking at this fantastic work, The Drum Major's Instinct. And then I got to plug AFTACON, Americans for the Arts, is having a convention. It's a ways away, but when we're here, we got to talk about it. June 11th through the 14th of 2025. Come with us in the summer. You like some of this work? There'll be more sort of grapplings to do in the summertime. It's directly relied or to arts and culture. So that is our time. That is what we have. A huge, amazing thank you to, I see some people in the chat that I love and know. So shout out to a lot of the people who are here. I'm so glad to have you all in the space. Any last and final two-second words for the panel?
Yes, I have a podcast, Reimagining Democracy for a Good Life. Wherever you get your podcast, please listen to it.
Shout out to Angela's podcast, Reimagine. Say it one more time slower so everybody got it.
Reimagining Democracy for a Good Life.
All right, check her out. Anybody else?
Please come to the Drum Major Instinct tomorrow night to hear Dr. King's second to last speech, his last sermon, delivered exactly 2 months before he was killed in Memphis, to his congregation at Ebenezer Baptist Church, embodied and performed by Chad Coleman. You may know him from The Wire, and the original choir from Antigone and Ferguson, the chorus that can't preach to itself by design. You can join us on Zoom and be in the room and in dialogue with people, New Sunny Mount Missionary Baptist Church in St. Louis. We hope you all join us.
It is an inspiration, let me just say. And a lasting one. Thank you.
Thank you, Pat.
Genna, if we can get the chat and know who was in the room, that would be incredible.
Absolutely. Certainly. Well, we will follow up with everybody with the recordings, all of the chat information, and so much more. We thank you for your support. We thank you for your time, and have a fantastic first day of October, first day of Arts and Humanities Month. Have a fun time living your life, and we will see you soon.
When you're in New York, come to Harlem Stage.
That's right. Better plug it. Better talk about Harlem Stage. That's right.
Okay.
Genna.
Thank you, sir.
Thank
being with
you.
you.